Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to our beloved lecturer, Madam Ezni binti Yahya. Today we are going to present regarding one of the deviant teachings, which is Anti-Hadith movement. But before that, we are from group 6 and our group members are me, myself, Ziyad Abqari, Muhammad Afiq Zakwan and Ahmad Hafizi. Okay, so before we go further, this is the outline of our presentation. So in the introduction part, we will have the definition of anti-hadith movement and liberalism, and also the development of anti-hadith movement in the past and modern era. Next, in the main points, we will have 4 characteristics and 2 relations. And last but not least, we will have the conclusion and references parts. Moving on to the next presenter.
Okay, for my part, I will go to introduction, which is include the background of the teaching. Okay, first let me go about what is anti-hadith. Anti-hadith is a group that denies the power and authority of hadith as the second law and sources of Islam after the Quran. They often come up with fragile evidence just so that hadith is rejected by the society. Then we go to liberalism. Liberalism is the idea of freedom, but in religious perspective, it is the ideology of philosophy that offered freedom from religious and traditional domain, which first brought by the Western by applying rational and empirical approaches. Next, we go to the background of anti-hadith during the past era. It actually has this anti-hadith movement actually has evolved since the time of companions, but abolished with the wisdom of the companions. But then it existed again in the second of century, but successfully solved by Imam Shafi'i, which is written of intellectual argument pertaining to this method in his writing, namely Arisalah and Al-Um. But then it arose again during the Western colonization in Islamic countries such as Iraq, Pakistan, and Egypt. This affected all the Muslim scholars educated there, including Zihar followers. Example of the Muslim scholars that affected is Dr. Ali Hassan Abdul Qadir, Toha Hussein, Dr. Ahmad Amin, and many more. In Malaysia, it was first brought by Kasim Ahmad with his writing, namely Hadis Satu Penilaian Semula, that then accounted by Majlis Agama Islam Kelantan in 1986, namely with the writing published, namely Salah Faham Terhadap Hadis Satu Penjelasan. In modern era, its name Quraniyun or Quranic Congregation was founded by Ahmad Jakralawi in Lahore, Pakistan in 1902. Among his strongest supporters, including Ghulam Ahmad Barwis, Rashad Khalifa, which famous, and also a pioneer from Malaysia, Kasim Ahmad. Next, we move to the next presenter.
So now we'll go through the main points of this presentation, which we will be explaining about characteristics of this anti-hadith movement and its relations with one of the deviant ideologies, which is liberalism. So the first characteristic is that anti-hadith movement divert the real meaning of the Quran. They simply translate and interpret the verses of the Al-Quran according to their desires, which this is very contradict with tafsir disciplines, which requires us to master the Arabic language and have a decent knowledge in usul fiqh, in hadith, in tafsir, and whatnot. one of the example of the diversion of the real meaning of the Quran by this movement, by this deviant movement, is that is written in hadith jawapan kepada pengkritik, written by Qasim Ahmad, also the founder of this movement in Malaysia. In Surah At-Tawabun, verses 12, he translated that obeying Rasul means that we obey to the revelation, which is Al-Quran. But the accurate meaning, the accurate translation for this verse is that, and obey Allah and obey the messenger. But if you turn away, then upon our messenger is only the duty of clear notification. So turn away here clearly shows that they turn away from hadith, which what has been brought by the Prophet Muhammad SAW, and it means that they also turn away from the Prophet SAW. Then this characteristic is also relatable with liberalism, which to be exact falls under Aqidah. They doubt the authenticity of Al-Quran. Well, we know that if we doubt the authenticity of Al-Quran, it symbolizes that we have lost our faith and our beliefs, because they doubt the authenticity of the Al-Quran. They simply divert the real meaning of the Al-Quran. One of the popular argument for this is that they said that Al-Quran was specialized only for Arabs. They said that Al-Quran is infused with Arabs and was sent down to the Prophet Muhammad SAW, which also an Arab. Since they are the owners of the language, they believe that Al-Quran only specialized for Arabs. But then it has been proven that Al-Quran has been utilized back then from 1,400 years later until today. Next presenter.
So next, moving on to the second characteristic, which is reject the salah obligation. Okay, so according to the followers of this teaching, they don't have to follow the way of salah taught by Prophet Muhammad SAW. Okay, this is because according to them, they can follow the methods of performing salah taught by the ancestors, okay, or the past prophets. Okay, for example, Prophet Ibrahim, Prophet Ismail, and Prophet Yaqub. Okay, and besides, since the Quran did not specify any methods of performing salah, according to the followers of this teaching, they can perform salah based on their mind and intellect. Okay, means that based on their common sense or logical. Okay, means that if they think the method is true, then it is true. Okay, so next, this characteristic is relatable to one of the ideologies, one of the deviant ideologies, which is liberalism. And to be specific, it falls under Sharia. Okay, this is because the teaching urges a new interpretation of the concept of ibadah, okay, which is salah. Okay, and this is completely opposite and contradict to one of the hadith by Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, which is Rasulullah SAW once said, "Pray as you have seen me praying." Okay, so based on this hadith, it is obviously we have to follow the methods of salah taught by Prophet Muhammad SAW. Okay, and to make it more clear, this characteristic manifests the basic or the idea of liberalism itself. Okay, which is freedom of thought, right? So we can see that this teaching, they freely create a new way of performing salah based on what pleases them. So next presenter, please. Thank you.
For my next point is characteristic refuse to believe in Qadar dan Qadar. This anti-hadith movement tend to refuse the belief in Qadar and Qadar, which is doom and divine decree. This because it cannot be explained scientifically, as stated in writing of Qasim Ahmad, namely hadis jawapan kepada pengkritik, and also in his another writing, namely politik. Next, move to the next characteristic.
As for the last characteristic, which is mocking the Prophet Muhammad's characteristics, they strongly refuses that they strongly refuses the maksum or infallibility of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And how can this understanding come to emergence? Well, this ideology was pioneered by Rashad Khalifa in his writing, namely, The Computer Speaks, God's Message to the World. He said that, and that Muhammad, the man, committed many mistakes. And also, his ideology was supported by Qasim Ahmad, the well-known founder of this anti-hadith movement in Malaysia. In his writing, Hadith Jawapan kepada Pengkritik, he said that if the prophets are infallible, they are no longer human. Can they be an example to human beings? So this is some proofs that they refuses the infallibility of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Move on to the next presenter.
So now we have come to the conclusion part. Okay, so next slide. So as a conclusion to the presentation, there are 4 characteristics of this anti-hadith movement. Firstly, they divert the real meaning of the Quran, which is relatable to liberalism ideology, and it falls under Aqidah. Next, they also reject the Salah obligation, which is also relatable to liberalism ideologies, but it falls under Sharia. And next, they refuse to believe in Qadar and Qadar, doom and divine decree, which is one of the pillars of Iman. And last but not least, they mock Prophet Muhammad's characteristics. Okay, so basically from this presentation, we have to admit, or we have to aware that Hadith or Sunnah is indeed a reliable source in Islam. So last but not least, we have come to the last part of presentation, which is the references part. So next. So basically, these are all the sources that we use for our presentation. Next. So I think that is all from us. Thank you so much to Madam for listening. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.